wrongfully connected. They wrongfully connected in Trinidad in the Caribbean, where lots of people came together under the British Empire. And the families didn't really get along that well, and the Catholic Church was prominent. So I had a great influence by the Catholic Church, which, you know, I challenge religion simply because that's the kind of guy I am. And at that young point of my life, I decided that it didn't matter where I worshiped. I love God, and there's only one true God. And I love that God. And I was created by and for the good use of that God. And, you know, if God is in it, I'm in it. And that's my spiritual heart. I find it everywhere I go. So whether it's you know, village church or the temple, or, you know, wherever there are people serving God, that's where my heart belongs. And that's the partnerships that I like to create. I love that one-on-one relationship that I've got with God. And I continue to try to do some of the practices that others do. I fail at a lot of those practices, but I never fail with my unwavering love for God.
We're so glad you're a part of our paths have come together. So now I want to transition to Barbara Turk of Temple Beth Elohim to share a little bit about TBE Table.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I have to follow Gary. He's a tough act to follow, but I just want to start by saying thanks so much, really, to Rabbi Sissenwein for bringing this initiative to us as a possibility, and really to Gary. He has been a mentor. He has taken us by the hand, and he has really helped guide us into this journey, and he is our partner. We and the Village Church are partners in this, and we tremendously value that relationship. We're also, Amy and I, extremely grateful to our small band of mighty volunteers as we have been piloting this initiative over the last few months, and to a TBE family who generously donated and helped seed the initiative. But really the next step is all of you. We are welcoming volunteers into TBE Table. We need people to work in the kitchen, and we also need people to be working behind the scenes and in non-kitchen related activities. So if you don't love to cook, there's still a place for you at TBE Table, and we really welcome you. If you're interested, please complete the Google form that Stephen has very kindly just dropped into the chat. If you can't figure out how to access the Google form in the chat, it'll be available in all sorts of TBE communications, as well as on the website, etc. So fill out the form, and most importantly, come to our informational session. It's on September 29th at 7 p.m. It will be on Zoom because of COVID, as much as we'd like to be in a room together. And at that time, we can all learn together more about TBE Table, what everybody can do to get involved. And we absolutely welcome everybody. So on this day, when all of our stomachs are empty, we really hope that everybody will think more about filling the bellies of others, of folks who struggle to get food on the table. So Amy and I welcome you with open arms, and we wish you a very happy New Year.
There we go. Perfect. I'm having technological difficulties myself. Barbara and Amy, thank you so much. So as you see in the chat room, we have the link, and we invite your involvement. We invite your donations, and I'm really looking forward to seeing this initiative grow and grow. And hopefully the need for this program will diminish over time with the work of our community, and certainly the work of Gary and Village Church, and hopefully other local churches will be joining us soon as well, and certainly the work of Mazon. So gratitude to all of you for joining us. We're now going to, I think, we're over about 600 people in the Zoom room, which I think is too difficult to ask questions. Stephen, I don't even know if they can bring a question directly to me. So I'm thinking we might want to transition to our next initiative. Stephen, I see that our speakers, so that's what we're going to do.
The speaker's here, Joel.
Great. So I think it's too difficult. And so if you have a question, if you're able in the chat room to send it directly to me, I don't know if you can, I invite you to do so while we listen into our next initiative. Once again, the message that I wanted to deliver this morning about compassion fatigue is there are so many important things to do. Don't get tired and overwhelmed. Pick one or two. And these are two extraordinary initiatives happening right now in our temple, along with so many others to choose from. But I want to now transition to Ed Shapiro, who has really led the charge on our Afghan project. And so Ed, you're in the room. I see the congressman is with us. Sarah, I hope as well.
Great. Well, thank you, Rabbi Sissenwein. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining. Today, I have the great honor to be joined by two of my good friends and leaders in the U.S. government, Congressman Jake Auchincloss, who represents the 4th District in Massachusetts, and Sarah Cross, the Deputy Assistant Secretary at the State Department's Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, also known as PRM. In a minute, Jake and Sarah are going to share their perspectives with us about the situation in Afghanistan and how communities like ours can play a critical role in supporting the resettlement of Afghan refugees, starting in the next few weeks. Before I turn it over to Congressman Auchincloss, I wanted to just quickly mention the work that is being done here at TBE. As many of you may remember, it was on Yom Kippur 5 years ago when Rabbi Sissenwein announced the official launch of the Temple Beth Elohim Syrian refugee sponsorship effort. Over those following several months, despite an election and a travel ban, we were able to bring 8 Syrian families to the greater Boston area with our partners at Jewish Family Services Metro West and HIAS, including 2 families who have become part of our own TBE family and a part of the Shapiro family. The following Yom Kippur, I spoke at the Hour of Response, and I told the story of how that prior year had changed my and my family's life forever, including my decision to retire from my 27-year investment career so that I could focus on refugee resettlement full-time. And over these past 5 years, in addition to continuing to support the Hayani and Al-Jalu families, a small group of us, including myself, Julie Kreis, Jessica Lasser, Michael Gilman, Deb Gottbetter, and Susan Seidel, have stayed in touch and waited for the day we might once again be able to welcome the stranger to our community. This spring, many of us were united for an outdoor lunch, and we all agreed that we wanted to restart our refugee sponsorship efforts. As a result, we have now officially launched what we're calling the New American Resettlement Committee, with plans to sponsor 1 to 2 Afghan families. We will be working closely with Jewish Community Relations Council, JFS Metro West again, and Catholic Charities, who will in turn be coordinating with their respective national resettlement agencies, as well as Sarah and her colleagues at PRM, to make what is being called Operation Allies Welcome a national success. Specifically, we are preparing to welcome these families by procuring housing, helping them find employment, and local medical care. We will offer transportation as they need it, assist with school enrollment, and provide financial assistance, which we estimate to be as much as $30,000 to $40,000 per family. We know this is very substantial, and it reflects both the high cost of living in Boston, potentially very large families we may be asked to resettle, as well as some legislative uncertainties that Rabbi Sissenwein alluded to in his talks during services earlier, but hopefully Congressman Auchincloss can help us get sorted out with his colleagues in Congress. Anyone who is interested in helping with this endeavor will have an opportunity to play a role, whether through financial support, in-kind donations, hands-on volunteering, or helping collect resources and goods. We will be sending out to everyone more information in the coming days. Now, I want to turn this over to Congressman Auchincloss. I got to know Jake during his campaign to succeed Joe Kennedy, and I immediately appreciated his commitment to public service. Jake was elected last year after a tough campaign and began serving his first term in Congress just 2 days before the attacks on our nation's capital on January 6th. In addition to being very interested in refugees and the needs of our community, Jake served with the Marine Corps in Afghanistan in 2012. And as the US closed its 2-decade involvement in that country last month, and we entered this new chapter, Jake has a unique perspective given his service there and his position now as a congressman. I also know that Jake cares deeply about the district and our city, so I'm anxious to hear from him. Jake, I'll turn it over to you.
For the warm introduction and for the work that you are doing on Afghan refugee resettlement. Good afternoon to everybody. I hope everyone is having an easy fast. And it's really an honor to be able to address you about the situation in Afghanistan. I want to start with relatively brief remarks on the past, present, and future in Afghanistan. And then I want to allow Rabbi at your discretion us to take some questions. I think questions and comments are a great way to have this conversation. And the common thread amongst my comments on the past, present, and future of Afghanistan is I'm going to complicate the narrative. We're all reading in the news over the last month very binary takes on Afghanistan. It was a failure. It was actually the most successful airlift in history. It was all for everything we did in the last 20 years was wasted. No, we should have kept going because it was working. I want to complicate the narrative because our engagement in Afghanistan, and indeed the country of Afghanistan itself, does not permit of easy binaries. So let me begin with the past in Afghanistan. This war has been with me my whole life. I covered 9/11 as the editor-in-chief of the Daytime, the day middle school newspaper in Newton. Served in Afghanistan as a platoon commander in Helmand province in 2012, where we patrolled through 3 Taliban-influenced villages. And then as a member of Congress, have been an engaged voice both on the repeals of the authorizations for the use of military force, as well as, of course, the withdrawal and transition in Afghanistan. So I bring both a personal as well as a professional perspective on the last 20 years. The war in Afghanistan began as a counterterrorism mission. It's quite illuminating to actually listen to President Bush's remarks in the months after 9/11, because he was quite scoped in what he was talking about the mission. It was bring to justice the architects of 9/11, and it was to deprive a base of operations for terrorists in Afghanistan going forward. That's a counterterrorism mission, a military mission. And it's been successful in Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden, of course, is dead. Al-Qaeda is severely degraded. And there has not been the repositioning of a terrorist group in Afghanistan with the capabilities to strike the US homeland in the last 2 decades. Counterterrorism mission has been successful. But under President Bush, particularly in the latter half of his administration, that counterterrorism mission, tightly scoped, easily digestible by the military, mutated into a counterinsurgency mission. And a counterinsurgency mission is a political initiative, not a military one. It is fundamentally about countering the insurgents with more competent governance, instilling confidence in the rule of law, providing an arms into plows program that gives combatants, especially low-level combatants, a pathway to economic productivity. It's about winning the hearts and minds, as we used to say. And counterinsurgencies are about 100,000 times more complicated than counterterrorism missions. And the example from Colombia is instructive. Colombia is widely regarded as having probably the most successful counterinsurgency mission of the last half century. But it took them 50 years. And it took a president of Colombia who won the Nobel Peace Prize for his incredible, far-sighted approach to. I'm going to pause here because I think someone's talking in the background. If we could just have everyone mute, it'd be great. It took 50 years in Colombia, and that was a country with much stronger civil institutions, with much stronger political leadership, and frankly, with a much more potent economy. Our counterinsurgency mission in Afghanistan never even got close to what we were trying to achieve, to what Colombia was able to achieve. The Afghan central government devolved into corruption. It was not able to instill confidence in the rule of law. It was not able to counter the Taliban with better services, with stability in terms of contracts, with the provision of services like water. And so we were constantly campaigning on a foundation of quicksand. And this was so evident to me when I was there in 2012. We did not have a political endgame to the military mission. This was obvious not just to lieutenants in Helmand province in 2012, it was obvious to the highest ranking officials in the National Security Council for 20 years. And the Washington Post's
I didn't know Martin on the phone, did you?
yeah.
Hey.
Mr. Prolt, thank you. There's been a tremendously good reporting on this issue from the Washington Post called the Afghanistan Papers that has really dived into the fact that at the highest levels of US government under Bush, Obama, and Trump,
Hello.
it was absolutely evident that.
Oh, but the problem.
Thank you. Mr. Perlmutter, can you please mute?
Yeah, I apologize. We lost our technology support completely, and I don't know where they are. So
I'm here. I just can't seem to mute Bert.
Rabbi, are I good?
You're good.
Okay. It is very clear that US security decision-making was subject to the sunk cost fallacy for about 20 years. In situation room after situation room, our highest level decision makers asked for more time, more troops, more treasure, because they were subject to the most classic cognitive bias of groups, which is to refuse to admit when your course of action is not working and to recognize that the investments you have made to date must be sunk and that you've got to change your actions going forward. We failed to do that as a country. And the sunk cost fallacy cost us $2 trillion, thousands of lives, and 20 years in a counterinsurgency mission that just never had a hope of succeeding. So let's fast forward to the present then in Afghanistan. President Biden's decision, to me, was the right one, and it was a high integrity one. And foundationally, it was the right one, and it was a high integrity one because he was the first commander in chief since 9/11 to not be subject to the sunk cost fallacy. He had the integrity to tell the American people, to tell himself, to tell his generals the hard truth that there was no political endgame in Afghanistan and we had to get out. It was not going to be glorious, but it was in the best strategic interests of the United States as we pivot to great power competition with China and to leading on transnational threats like climate change, counterterrorism, public health. Our focus was not best used. Our international reserves of goodwill were not best used in Afghanistan. So I believe he made the right decision. I've been outspoken on that. Again, though, to complicate the narrative, just because he made the right decision does not mean the execution over the last 6 months was flawless. Of course it was not. We should have begun evacuations earlier. I think that is apparent. The intelligence failures and not foreseeing that the Afghan security forces were going to collapse as quickly as they did were evident. And most notably, we need to examine the decision to retrograde from Bagram Air Base as quickly as we did, potentially forsaking a key counterterrorism installation and also allowing for the decarceration of some dangerous Al-Qaeda affiliated terrorists. These are all things that we need to have a congressional investigation about. These are all things that the president should be held to account for. But that series of complications should not obscure the fact that fundamentally we made the right decision to get out, and that we have also been able to withdraw 120,000 Afghan allies. And here to me is one of the most important components of our path forward with Afghanistan, looking into the future. The resettlement of Afghan refugees in the United States, including raising the refugee cap so that we can fully welcome them, is critical to how we continue a strong relationship with that country. It should be complemented by using our economic and diplomatic leverage to do our utmost to ensure the Taliban respect human rights without any sense of naivete about the kind of people we're dealing with. And we should also continue as best as possible to make economic investments in that country. Sometimes people say, oh, Afghanistan is the next Vietnam, to which I would counter, I sure hope so. Vietnam in the last 50 years has had a top 5 GDP per capita growth. It has gone from one of the poorest countries in the world to a middle-class country with unquantifiable increases in standard of living, reduction in infant mortality, increase in literacy. The trend line of Vietnam post-Saigon is actually incredibly positive. And in large measure, that was because the United States stayed economically engaged after militarily disengaging. And that needs to be our path forward with Afghanistan as well, especially given its proximity to China and the vast reserves of mineral wealth that it has that makes it enticing to the Belt and Road Initiative. So I'm going to pause there. I would love to take people's questions or comments, or Rabbi, I defer to you on the program.
Yes, Congressman, I thank you. Thank you for being with us today, and thank you for your service. Ed, I think we should move to Sarah only because we're on a very tight schedule.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, why don't we do that? And hopefully Jake will have a time for a question or two for you and Sarah. But thank you so much for sharing those words and putting everything into perspective. So now I want to turn to my good friend and partner, Sarah Cross. Sarah and I worked closely for the past several years before she was recruited into the Biden administration to help build a network of community sponsorship centers all across the country. Sarah and I share a deep belief in the power of local communities to not only increase the quantity of refugee resettlement, but the quality. As a result of our collective work over these past couple of years, over 30 cities now have started community sponsorship programs across the country. Of course, neither of us knew that in September 2021, there would be an urgent need to very quickly resettle as many as 100,000 Afghan refugees, but here we are. Thanks in large part to Sarah and her colleagues' tireless efforts over these past 10 months, since she joined the transition team and then the administration, we are now in a position to welcome these Afghan families who have been our allies for the past 2 decades. So now, Sarah, could you please share with us a little bit about the situation and how you think the Temple Beth Elohim community can help? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ed. Can you all hear me? Gmar Tova, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me on this really meaningful day. I've heard so much about Temple Beth Elohim over the years from my wonderful colleague and friend, Ed. So thank you for having me here. It's really very meaningful to me. His stories of both your congregation's work to support refugees and his own personal experience sponsoring a Syrian refugee has inspired me in my own work and in many ways has shaped the kind of policy and programs that I've sought to advance over the years around refugee resettlement. On behalf of the Biden administration, I want to thank you all for the support that you've already given to so many refugees and to share a little bit with you about why the administration thinks this kind of deep community involvement in refugee resettlement is so critical. Resettling refugees in the United States is a vital lifeline for the most vulnerable people in the world, including individuals who are fleeing conflict and violence and persecution. Our program, the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, offers a chance at a new life here, one in safety and security. But it is not as simple as just bringing refugees here to safety. For refugee newcomers to thrive, they really need to be supported both with direct assistance to meet basic needs, and also to be included into and be given the opportunity to contribute to the social and cultural and economic life of their new communities. They need assistance, but they also need friends and caring neighbors. The US has resettled over 3.5 million refugees over the last 40 years, and though the program works in partnership with a network of 9 national resettlement agencies, the success of the program would not be possible without the robust, highly engaged involvement of communities that welcome them. President Biden recognized this from the very outset of his administration, calling on us in the State Department to pursue approaches to refugee resettlement that more deeply engage the American public in welcoming refugees, and also to develop an entirely new program to allow communities such as yours to sponsor refugees outside the established refugee resettlement infrastructure. This instruction came alongside a very ambitious new refugee resettlement target of 65,000 refugee arrivals this current fiscal year, and a commitment to admit up to 125,000 next fiscal year, starting in October, so very soon. These two policy pronouncements together reflect the administration's overarching priorities to, one, welcome significantly higher numbers of refugees in order to provide critical protection and to exert U.S. global humanitarian leadership, and two, to do so through deep, sustained community engagement that helps ensure that new arrivals are provided the support that they need to thrive and to contribute. The kind of community support that I know you all have provided to Syrian families in the past, and that we want to be able to continue to enable congregations like yours and other community groups to be able to do now and well into the future. So in short, as Ed has said, we are prioritizing both quantity and quality when it comes to refugee resettlement. Though we had already planned to expand these opportunities for local community support, as I said, to launch a new private sponsorship program next year, we now find ourselves in a moment in which we can, and indeed must, immediately put these plans into practice with the help of congregations like yours across the country. As many of you know, and as has been already covered by my colleagues here, we have been welcoming our Afghan allies and offering them a new home here in the United States, and at an enormous scale and speed. This population is of special concern to the United States, as many of them are at heightened risk due to their affiliation with us and their support for our efforts in Afghanistan over the last 20 years. We now have tens of thousands of Afghan guests who will soon be ready to make their way to new communities, over 150 communities across the country. It is truly a historic moment, but one that will also strain our existing domestic resettlement structure, which has not in recent history been asked to receive so many refugees in so little time. Moreover, our resettlement system has already been 4 years of low refugee arrivals and no investment in the program. So it's a really big lift. That is all the more reason why local community support can help, it can complement and build upon and enhance our domestic resettlement system. And it's so critically important in this moment, not only for the Afghans who are arriving right now and need the warm welcome that communities like yours can provide, but also to create a strong foundation of community welcome and support for future arrivals who will need the same. Thank you so much.
Sarah, thank you. And I want to say we have a hard stop, so I apologize because people need to get back to the synagogue for the hour of response at 4:30. But I would love, Ed, if you could just address our own synagogue effort now. I did get a question through the chat room about the work status. Can they work? The Afghan families that will be coming to us, what is necessary? And then for you or the congressman or Sarah, I did get a question from Ambassador Alan Solomon, which is, how can we help Afghan citizens who are left behind in Afghanistan? So let's start with our own project.
Sure. So I'll turn this over to Sarah. Hold on one second. The work authorization is a critical question, one of the many dozens, if not hundreds of questions this administration has had to answer in the just few weeks that it's set up the program. Sarah can explain in more detail. There is not a automatic work authorization like there were for the Syrian refugees, but there's also not a prohibition. And so the administration is working along with Congress to create a path so that these families can be supported, and including work and access to health benefits as quickly as possible. Sarah, do you want to say anything else about the current status of that?
Thanks, Ed. Just to emphasize that a little bit more, and I didn't cover this in my remarks, but it's important for everyone to know that because of the speed of the arrival of the Afghan newcomers, they're not coming in through our traditional resettlement program. They're arriving as humanitarian parolees, which means they don't come with all of the benefits that would normally attach to refugees arriving. They will be able to complete their work authorizations, and we're helping them to do that so that hopefully that's all in place by the time they arrive in their new communities, but they will not have access to public assistance, medical, health, cash, food assistance that is really critical to help refugees in their initial days in their new communities, which is another reason why it's really critical right now that we have the support of local communities who can come in and try to fill some of these critical gaps until hopefully Congress passes a legislative fix, Congressman, I'm looking at you, who can help ensure that those gaps are filled so that we can put these newcomers on as stable a path as possible.
Thank you. Congressman, I don't know if you want to address the question, what can we do to help Afghan citizens who are left behind and are at risk under a Taliban rule?
It's a terrific question. As many hundreds of thousands of Afghan refugees as we can welcome, we all recognize the reality that there are tens of millions of Afghans who are going to be in Afghanistan. And ultimately, the path forward for improving their quality of life, I believe, rests foundationally on economic development. We have, in large measure, recognized that the United States' ability to affect the political or military environment in Afghanistan is quite limited. But that does not mean our ability to affect the economic conditions in Afghanistan are limited. There are opportunities to establish special economic zones where Western companies can have the legal certainty they need to make investments and then reinvest the proceeds back into human capital and physical infrastructure. There are opportunities to use the US leverage over the Taliban's government revenues, which are largely funded from the international community, and their actual financial reserves, which are held in US controlled banks, to insist on basic guarantees of human rights. So we haven't lost all leverage, but I do think we need to focus, and we need to recognize that the path forward for US engagement in Afghanistan is going to be a tug of war largely between us and China. It's going to center probably on mineral resources in terms of the economic dimension, and that we can either not engage at all and allow China and its ally Pakistan to dictate the course forward, which will be extractive rather than investment focused, or we can ourselves engage and ensure that the revenues from economic activity in Afghanistan are not saturated by a kleptocracy, as has happened in other countries that are mineral rich, but instead reinvested back into the people in education and healthcare and well-being. We have a choice to make. That is a fork in the road, and we are making it as we speak, and just keeping your politicians to account on making the right one.
Thank you so much. Ed, in the short time we have left, I did get a question about our own families that will be coming. I know in terms of the Syrian families, their English was very limited. I'm told that many of the Afghan families come with a more proficient level of English because they've been exposed to Americans to such a degree. But the question is, what are the resources available? What will we be providing? What will the needs be in terms of language acquisition, in terms of adjusting to life in America?
Yeah, so one of the many challenges that this program faces is the lack of information with any real advance notice whatsoever. As you all saw from the terrible images in Kabul a few weeks ago, there was such an incredible scramble and life-threatened situation for those couple of weeks while we did manage to get out just over 120,000. A third or so of those have now made their way to US soil, and they're making their way through this process on US military bases, and they will start exiting. We are only now gathering some of the information about some of the demographics, their family size, their skills, their languages. Sarah may have some current data in terms of the mix, but I think it's reasonable to expect that this population, as opposed to other populations, including the Syrian families, will on average have a higher English language proficiency. Doesn't mean the entire family will, or even all the families, but my understanding is a higher percentage do, but it's all local. So we don't know the families that are coming here, if they will in fact have some or any English, as well as the particular skills, as well as significant questions that we all face around extended families. There's a monumental effort going on right now by Sarah and her colleagues and some of our partners to figure out in real time where these families are going to end up. Those, what did Sarah say, 160, 120 cities across the country that have raised their hand and said, we will take them. They don't know anything about them and won't know until possibly right before they arrive. So it makes it very challenging to do things like housing. Do you have a single individual or a family of 10 or anything in between? We're going to have to be very nimble, I think, and find temporary solutions in ways that we haven't in other resettlement programs while we gain this information and knowledge and figure out what's ultimately what's best for the Afghans themselves. Sarah, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, Ed, you got that exactly right. And we are really, you've got the key challenge, which is that we will not have sufficient lead time and a lot of information before we help depart these individuals to their final communities. I will say on the language acquisition piece that we do expect there to be a higher level of English proficiency among those who were special immigrants, those who worked alongside U.S. military and diplomatic professionals, but they are not everybody who is arriving falls under that category. And so there will be a big mix, and we are preparing for every scenario and hoping that communities around the country can be as flexible and creative as we're trying to be in designing the program so that everybody can have the kind of support that they need, individualized support when they arrive.
I want to thank you, Sarah, Congressman, for being with us. Ed, we look forward to partnering and welcoming families into our midst. We have an incredible group of volunteers here, and this is obviously a very important issue. I also want to thank Gary and Barbara and Amy and Abby as we continue to explore the issue of food insecurity and reach out to those in need, not just throughout our nation, but in our own neighborhood. And so we ask for your support in these two initiatives with time, with funding, as we continue to help better our world. And so with that, I just want to say once again, to a good new year filled with the strength to heal our world. For those who are now going to go back to the synagogue, we invite you to drive slowly and carefully because many of you are fasting. We'll begin at 4:30. For those of you who are going to remain on Zoom, we're going to switch to a different Zoom link for the hour of response. And with great gratitude, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.